talked about magnetic fields. I talked about microwaves. I talked about RF. They also have these satellites in the sky right now. And again, people think I'm crazy when I say this, but watch that podcast with that Harvard scientist who worked for DARPA and the CIA and all this stuff, and he kind of explains this.
Q.
They have this apparatus that essentially can read and write thoughts to people's mind and do it from satellites from space. And they could do this on a mass scale, right? And essentially, a lot of people in the movement, they felt it was a very spiritual thing. Whether you're a traditional Christian or a Muslim, whoever, or like one of the alternative spirituality crowd, a lot of people have felt like this is a very spiritual sort of an experience, right? And so with these mind control weapons, they can essentially mimic or simulate a spiritual or godlike experience, right? They're essentially doing a man in the middle attack for your relationship with God or source or whoever that you're connecting in with there.
Right.
And so it's a very scary thing. And one of the examples I like to use is we would have, especially back at Geronimo 1, days where there would be 10 to 12 women and girls from across the country that were fans of mine and followed what we were doing, that they didn't know each other, they didn't talk to each other, but all on the same night. And then the day after, they'd be writing and telling us this, they would all have these very specific, very elaborate dreams about doing things with me. And it would be a very specific story, and it would be the exact same story from a dozen unrelated people who don't talk to each other across the country, right? So it's almost like a synchronized program getting pushed down into their minds.
Wow.
So it's very wild stuff. And so that's where this like idea of spiritual warfare comes in, right? We got the white hats over here trying to steer us in a positive direction, trying to set up the board, trying to essentially clear the path for us. And I had talked a little bit in the past about how, um, you know, get into tricky situations and things would just seem to work out. How we would go into politics, and just the right people would kind of get steered into our path to make things work out every time, right? So a lot of people looking at us now, they think, oh, you got not that many followers on Telegram, you've been kind of wiped out, all this stuff. How the hell are you going to make some kind of like dramatic regime change happen? And they don't realize we have this godlike apparatus, this godlike power behind us. And so not even just through the movement, long times before that too, I would not be standing here today. I would not have survived if I didn't have this thing essentially clearing the way for me and helping me make stuff happen. But we always got to be as grounded as possible, right? Because there's the white hats on one side, there's the crooked FBI on the other, that
Right.
they are trying to take that same stuff and steer us into the worst situation possible. So I feel, I see people like Jake, and I know that he's a very spiritual guy. I know that he's very connected in his relationship with God. And I feel very bad because I know that that relationship with God was essentially hijacked and abused to try to like lead him into a situation that he would get himself tossed in jail for a long time. And so that is one of the scariest things you can possibly imagine. And that is one of the big things I'm going to be trying to unpacking and explaining. General Flynn,
Yep.
everybody knows, like at this point he's saying, oh, this was a CIA thing designed to like screw us. But at the time, General Flynn was a huge believer, right? He was doing all kinds of stuff, like he was sure this was going to happen.
Right.
Donald Trump, right, doesn't necessarily know the plan. He's not completely in control, but he could also feel like he wasn't physically asked by the military. He was like led by these white hats into the course that he's on, right? So a lot
Right.
of the people in the movement, they are interacting with this stuff and being targeted by this stuff, whether they know it or not. And obviously, we're very proud sort of people, so people get mad at me when I say that, but I throw myself in there too, right?
Yep.
We have situations where just it is like you're being driven like a robot, and so we just got to try to be as grounded as possible, and always before we act, logically think. does this make sense, or is this leading me to a positive direction, or is this leading me into danger? And try to be as grounded as possible so that we can be making the right decisions and assessments on that basis. um, but yeah, it's a really wild, terrifyingly powerful technology that needs to be regulated through this Internet Bill of Rights, and people need to be aware that this kind of stuff exists and has existed. Right? It was operationalized in the war in the '90s, right? So that was the '90s version. Imagine what they have now.
Right.
So I encourage everybody, go on the site, watch that podcast. It's absolutely fascinating. That kind of technology is the basis, is the air support that of what we are doing here, right? And it's a very important concept for people to understand that, and realize that, we have been getting manipulated, but we can easily win as long as we keep our head on straight and don't let this crooked FBI and their intelligence partners like MI6 drive us into a ditch here.
Amen. And you guys, that's the if you go to qintel.pro, click up top rabbit hole, you can find mind control in there. That's the page we're looking at here.